She said, because I always stand next to Ronnie on his left side, and he was shot on his left side. And if I had only been there when he was walking to that car on his left side, I could have taken that bullet for Ronnie.
Wow.
And Evans was shocked by that. I was shocked by it. I said,
There's a photo most people scroll past without a second thought, but once you really see it, it hits different. June 2004, the steps of the U.S. Capitol. An elderly woman stands beside a flag-covered casket, surrounded by world leaders, cameras, and silence that feels heavy. She looks small, distant, like nothing around her matters except that one moment. That woman was Nancy Reagan, and the man in that casket, the center of her entire world. Most people think they know her story, the style, the influence, the headlines, but what came after the spotlight faded tells a completely different story. To understand the ending, you have to go back to the beginning. Nancy Reagan was born Anne Frances Robbins on July 6, 1921, in New York City. Her early life wasn't stable. Her parents separated when she was very young, and she spent years being raised by relatives while her mother chased a career in acting. That kind of childhood leaves a mark. She was cared for, but not always close to the people she needed most. Things changed in 1929 when her mother remarried a respected doctor, Loyal Davis. He adopted Nancy, gave her his name, and for the first time she had structure and security. She admired him deeply, and that stability shaped who she became. She later studied at Smith College, then followed her mother's path into acting. Hollywood gave her opportunities, including a contract with MGM, but her career stayed modest. Everything shifted when she met Ronald Reagan in 1951. He was already known, confident, and moving toward a bigger future. They married in 1952, and from that moment, Nancy built her life around him completely. Friends noticed it right away. His goals became her goals. His schedule became her world. She wasn't just his partner, she was fully committed to his success. When Ronald Reagan entered the politics and became governor of California in 1966, Nancy stepped into public life, and that's when the pressure started. People watched everything.
Former First Lady Nancy Reagan will be laid to rest on Friday beside her husband at the Reagan Presidential Library in Simi Valley, California. The former First Lady died yesterday of congestive heart failure at her home in Los Angeles at the age of 94.
The way she looked at him, the way she stood by his side, even her expressions became headlines. Critics mocked her for being too devoted, turning her into a target early on. But she didn't change. If anything, she leaned into her role even more. In 1981, when Ronald Reagan became president, Nancy walked into the White House with one clear mission: protect him at all costs. But Washington had its own expectations, and the criticism came fast. She introduced new White House china, redesigned private spaces, wore high-end fashion, and hosted elegant events. Supporters saw it as bringing back class and style. Critics saw it very differently. The nickname Queen Nancy spread quickly, and the media attention only grew louder. She later admitted how much those early months affected her, but what came next would change everything. Just 69 days into the presidency, a shocking moment unfolded. On March 30th, 1981, during a public appearance in Washington, D.C., shots were fired. The president was injured, along with several others. It was a moment that stunned the nation. Nancy was at the White House when she got the call. At first, she was told he was unharmed, but something didn't sit right. She asked again, and then she heard the truth. She rushed to the hospital, where Ronald Reagan remained calm, even trying to lighten the mood before surgery. But for Nancy, nothing about that moment felt light. She stayed by his side for nearly 2 weeks, and after that, everything changed. From that point on, fear followed her everywhere. Every public event, every appearance, every step he took outside felt unpredictable. She lived with constant worry, always thinking about what could happen next. And in that search for control, for some kind of reassurance, she made a decision that would later raise a lot of attention. She turned to someone she trusted from her earlier years, an astrologer named Joan Quigley. This wasn't something many people knew at the time. It stayed behind closed doors, away from the public eye, but that connection would quietly influence decisions in ways few expected. Joan Quigley wasn't an unknown figure. She was educated, well-connected, and already part of social circles in California. She had even crossed paths with Nancy years before. Astrology had always been part of their world in small ways, but now it was about to play a much bigger role than anyone imagined. After the shooting, everything changed behind the scenes, and almost no one knew about it. Nancy Reagan began regularly contacting astrologer Joan Quigley. Before major events, trips, or appearances, she would go over Ronald Reagan's schedule, and Quigley would study charts, looking for good and bad timing. Based on that, adjustments were made. Travel time shifted, events moved, press appearances were quietly rescheduled. To the public, it all looked normal, but behind closed doors, there was a hidden layer guiding the calendar. Very few people knew what was really happening. Staff members were simply told what the schedule would be, without explanation. Some found it confusing, even frustrating, but they followed instructions.
Didn't someone come up to you and ask you how you were feeling, and didn't you answer that you never felt better in your life? Well, he said, I was lying there, and he said a car came up and a deputy sheriff got out. He said my horse was neighing with pain and kicking. He had 2 broken legs. The deputy sheriff put the gun in his ear and put the horse out of its misery. He said my dog had a broken back and was whining with pain, and he went over, did the same thing, put there and shot him. And then he came over to me and said, now how are you feeling?
Then came Donald Reagan, a powerful figure from the business world who stepped in as chief of staff in 1985. He was structured, direct, and used to being in control. From the start, he noticed something unusual. Nancy frequently reached out to him with input about schedules, decisions, even people within the administration. She was deeply involved, and she wasn't quiet about it. For Reagan, this created tension. He believed his role was to manage the president's operations, not take direction from the First Lady. What started as frustration slowly turned into a serious clash. Things escalated during a major political controversy in the mid-1980s. As pressure built, Nancy became convinced that changes were needed around her husband. She wanted stronger control, more protection, and people she fully trusted. The situation between her and Reagan reached a breaking point. Disagreements spilled into public view, and the tension became impossible to ignore.
By early 1987, Reagan was out. Whether he stepped down or was pushed aside depends on who tells the story, but one thing is clear: it wasn't a quiet exit. Then came the moment that shocked everyone. In 1988, Reagan released a book revealing what had been kept secret for years. He claimed that many scheduling decisions had been influenced by guidance from an astrologer in San Francisco. The story exploded instantly. Media outlets picked it up, headlines spread everywhere, and suddenly Nancy Reagan was at the center of a completely new kind of attention. The White House responded quickly. They confirmed that she had consulted an astrologer, but strongly stated that official decisions were not based on it. Ronald Reagan himself made it clear that his leadership choices were his own. Nancy later addressed it in her own words. She explained that after nearly losing her husband, fear had taken over. She was trying anything she could think of to keep him safe. And from her perspective, it made sense. Watching someone you love face danger changes how you think. Every crowd, every trip, every appearance can feel uncertain. People debated it for years. Some understood her reasoning, others questioned the approach. That discussion never fully faded. But one thing did change for good: how people saw Nancy Reagan. She was no longer just viewed as a stylish first lady or a supportive partner. Now she was seen as someone actively involved behind the scenes, shaping decisions in ways few had realized. And soon, those same instincts, protection, loyalty, and control, would be tested in a way no one could prepare for. because after leaving the White House in 1989, life became quieter, but also much harder. They returned to California, settling into a home in Los Angeles, with time split between there and their ranch in Santa Barbara. At first, it looked like a peaceful retirement. Ronald gave speeches, attended events, and stayed active. Nancy continued her public work. On the surface, everything seemed steady. But Nancy noticed small changes, things others might miss. He began forgetting names more often, repeating stories, losing track of simple details. At first, it was easy to brush off. He had always used humor to cover little memory slips. But this felt different, subtle at first, then impossible to ignore. In 1994, after a public appearance in Washington, something happened that made it real. Back in their hotel, Ronald paused and admitted he wasn't sure where he was. That moment confirmed what Nancy had been fearing. Soon after, they went to the Mayo Clinic. The diagnosis came back clearly: Alzheimer's disease. It was the answer she expected, but that didn't make it easier. By the time you look for answers like that, deep down you already know something is wrong. Later that year, Ronald Reagan shared the news publicly in a handwritten letter. It was direct, honest, and unlike anything people had seen from a former president. For Nancy, this was the start of a completely new chapter, one that would test her strength more than anything before. In the beginning, life still had some normal moments. He went for walks, greeted people warmly, and carried that same kindness he had always shown. But slowly, things began to change even more. To the outside world, everything still looked fine. People who saw Ronald Reagan during those years often said he looked strong, healthy, even full of life. But behind closed doors, a different reality was unfolding. Some days, he seemed like himself. Other days, he was confused, unsure of where he was or what was happening. He began forgetting major parts of his life, even moments as big as living in the White House. Time itself became unclear. Years blurred together. Seasons didn't always make sense. And for Nancy, this wasn't sudden. It was slow, steady, and painful to watch. She stayed right beside him through it all, sleeping next to him, waking up each day knowing he might remember her or might not. That kind of uncertainty changes everything. She once said this experience was even harder than the moment he was injured years ago. Back then, there was fear, but also relief. This was different. This was watching someone slowly fade while still being physically there. She called it the long goodbye, and that description stayed with people. There were also quiet moments that showed just how much had changed. Ronald loved riding horses, something that had always brought him peace, but eventually, it wasn't safe anymore. When he was told he had to stop, it hit him hard. He reportedly became emotional, but still responded calmly, saying he would be okay. That moment said everything without needing many words. By 1998, Nancy made a difficult decision. She sold the ranch they loved. It no longer made sense to keep it, and her focus had completely shifted. From that point on, her life became centered on one thing: caring for him. She stayed mostly at home, managing his care, working closely with staff, and protecting his privacy. Just like she had once guarded his public image, she now protected his dignity with the same level of intensity. And through all of this, something unexpected happened. She found a new fight. Watching him decline changed her perspective. It wasn't just sadness, it sparked determination. She began speaking out about medical research, especially efforts that could help people facing similar conditions. She believed more could be done, and she wasn't afraid to say it. At the time, one of the biggest debates in science and politics focused on stem cell research. Many believed it had the potential to lead to major breakthroughs, especially for conditions like Alzheimer's. But it was also controversial, and funding was limited. Nancy didn't focus on the politics. For her, this was personal. She began meeting with experts, speaking publicly, and encouraging leaders to support further research. Even in her 80s, while caring for her husband every day, she stayed active in this effort.
People who had once criticized her started to see a different side. She wasn't just a public figure from the past. She was someone pushing for change. For a moment, support came from all directions. different groups, different viewpoints. People found common ground in what she was standing for. Even within her own family, where there had been disagreements over the years, this issue brought some unity. But while all of this was happening publicly, privately, things continued to decline. By the early 2000s, Ronald Reagan rarely left home. He needed constant care and supervision. Nancy remained by his side, organizing everything and making sure he was comfortable. She spent hours with him every day, sitting nearby, reading to him, holding his hand. Whether he fully understood or not, she stayed present, always. In his final years, he hardly left the house. At over 80 years old, she carried this responsibility with quiet strength, supported by a small group around her. Those who witnessed it later described her dedication as remarkable. She was there in the mornings, there at night, and there in every moment that mattered. Even when he seemed distant, she stayed close. Even when recognition faded, she didn't step away. In 2000, she shared a collection of letters he had written to her over the years. Reading them revealed a side of their relationship many people never saw. He was warm, expressive, and deeply connected to her. He wrote often, from different places, at different times, always finding ways to remind her how much she meant to him. And that's what made everything even harder, because she wasn't just remembering a public figure, she was remembering the man behind it all, the one who had once filled her life with words, laughter, and constant affection. In one letter, Ronald Reagan once wrote that he wasn't complete without Nancy, that she was his whole world, his reason for everything. Words like that don't fade easily, but the man who wrote them slowly did. Years before his passing, much of who he was had already slipped away. And then, on June 5, 2004, after nearly a decade of illness, Ronald Reagan passed away at 93 years old. But in his final moments, something unexpected happened. According to their daughter, he opened his eyes after days of silence and looked directly at Nancy. Clear, present, like himself again, if only for a moment. Nancy later called it the greatest gift he could have given her, and that moment stayed with her forever. Then came the week the entire world watched. Nancy didn't leave anything to chance. She planned every detail of her farewell, thinking carefully about what he deserved and how he should be remembered. It became one of the most powerful public ceremonies in modern history. His body was first honored in California, then flown to Washington, where thousands of people came to pay their respects. Leaders, former presidents, global figures, they all showed up. The attention was massive, but Nancy stayed steady through it all. She stood through long ceremonies, public appearances, and emotional tributes without breaking, calm, composed, completely in control. Until the very end. At the final service in California, as the sun began to set, something shifted. She stepped forward, said her quiet goodbye, and for the first time, the emotion showed. After more than 50 years together, she was now on her own. Returning home was different. The house was the same, but everything else had changed. The routines, the people, the constant care, all gone. What remained was silence. Friends later said she felt the loss deeply. Her entire life had been built around one person, and now that center was gone. She kept his memory close. Photos filled the house. His presence stayed with her in small ways every single day. But she didn't disappear, and that surprised people. Instead, she stepped into a new role, protecting his legacy. In the years that followed, Nancy became deeply involved with Ronald Reagan Presidential Library. She attended events, welcomed visitors, and made sure his story stayed alive. Even in her later years, she kept showing up. Public appearances, major events, important moments, she remained active well into her 80s. She also continued supporting causes she believed in, especially medical research. Even though her personal journey had changed, she stayed committed to helping others facing similar challenges. People began to see her differently. The strong, controlled image from her earlier years started to soften. She spoke more openly about loss, about loneliness, and about what it feels like to lose the person your life revolved around. For the first time, many saw a more personal side of her. But time was also taking its toll. Nancy had always been physically small, but as she got older, she became more fragile. Health challenges started to build. She had already faced serious illness years earlier and spoke openly about it, helping bring awareness at a time when many stayed silent. That honesty had a lasting impact. But in her later years, new difficulties appeared. She experienced several falls at home, leading to injuries that required recovery time. Each incident was a reminder of how much life had changed, from the energy of public life to the quiet reality of aging. The contrast was clear. Most of these struggles were kept private. She handled them away from the spotlight, just as she had handled so much throughout her life. Even as her strength faded, one thing didn't change: her determination to keep going. Because for Nancy Reagan, stepping back was never really an option, not after everything she had already faced. Nancy Reagan never wanted to appear weak or fading. Even in her later years, she stayed focused, sharp, and present. In 2010, during one of her final major interviews, she spoke clearly about her husband, their life, and everything they had built together. The same control, the same precision, it was still there. But as time went on, public appearances became rare. The woman who once hosted grand events and stood on the world's stage was now spending most of her time at home, surrounded by memories that never left her. Family slowly came closer again. Her daughter Patty, after years of distance and public disagreements, began rebuilding their relationship. It wasn't perfect, and they didn't erase the past, but they found their way back to each other. Her son Ron stayed close, and even Michael, her stepson, showed warmth toward her in later years. It wasn't a perfect family story, but in the end, they showed up for each other. Her world became smaller, but it was still hers. Then, on March 6, 2016, that chapter came to an end. Nancy Reagan passed away at her home at 94 years old. The news spread quickly, and reactions came in from across the world. Leaders, public figures, and people from all sides shared their thoughts. Some remembered her strength, others her loyalty, but everyone recognized the impact she had made. A few days later, she was laid to rest beside Ronald Reagan in California. After years apart, they were reunited. It was a full-circle moment. Two lives that had shaped each other completely, now resting side by side. But her story isn't simple, and it never was. Nancy Reagan was one of the most talked about and debated first ladies in history. Some saw elegance and loyalty. Others saw control and influence behind the scenes. The truth sits somewhere in between. She didn't hold official power, but she understood influence better than most. She knew how to protect, how to guide, and how to stay close to the center of decision-making without stepping into the spotlight directly. She played a role in major moments, supported key decisions, and stood firm when she believed something needed to change. That kind of presence doesn't go unnoticed. At the same time, she had flaws. She could be protective, strong-willed, and difficult in certain situations. She had disagreements, long-standing tensions, and complicated family relationships. Her daughter Patty spoke openly about their distance for years. Her sons followed different paths. The image of a perfect family never fully matched reality. But there's another side that can't be ignored. She stood beside her husband through one of the most difficult journeys a family can face. Day after day, year after year, she stayed present, even as he slowly faded. She spoke openly about health issues when many avoided the topic. She used her platform to push for awareness and change, and even in her later years, she continued showing up, not for attention, but because she believed it mattered. For Nancy Reagan, power was never just about politics, it was personal. It was about protecting the person she loved most and making sure his story would never be forgotten. She once said her life truly began when she married Ronald Reagan. Some people didn't understand that, but for her, it was simple. That was her truth, and she lived by it until the very end. That image of her standing alone next to his casket, it says everything without words. The silence, the stillness, the weight of it all. She knew exactly who she was, and she never stepped away from that. It just came at a cost few people truly see. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like and subscribe so you don't miss more powerful stories like this.